I was standing beside my father's coffin when the woman I'd never seen before took my hand and said she was sorry for our loss. Ours. Not mine. Ours. And as she turned to leave, my mother looked at her with such pure hatred that for a second I thought the body in the coffin wasn't the biggest secret in that room. Some truths only come to light when there's no one left to defend them. And what I discovered at that wake didn't just change how I saw my father. It changed how I saw the last 23 years of my life. My father died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning. 59 years old, healthy, no signs of trouble. I received the call from my mother while I was in the office in Denver, reviewing budget spreadsheets for a client who was complaining about everything. She didn't cry. She just said, "Your father is gone. You need to come home," and hung up. I stared at the phone long enough for my supervisor to walk by my desk and ask if everything was all right. I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe because we always say yes when the truth is too big to fit into a sentence. I took the first flight to Sacramento. 5 hours sitting next to a woman watching romantic comedies at way too loud. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I'd seen my father. It had been 3 months. Sunday dinner at their house. He'd made ribs on the grill. My mother complained they were tough. He didn't answer. He just silently cleaned the grill while she went inside. I helped. We didn't talk much. We never talked much. He was the type who showed love by paying bills, fixing things, showing up. I grew up thinking that was enough, thinking that was what love was. When I arrived at their house, the driveway was full of cars, neighbors, cousins, people from church I hadn't seen since adolescence. Everyone brought food, aluminum platters, Tupperware with handwritten labels. My mother was in the living room, surrounded, receiving hugs with the posture of someone following protocol. She saw me and waved. She didn't get up. I went to her, knelt down, and kissed the top of her head. She smelled of stale coffee and hand cream. "Are you okay?" I asked. She looked at me as if the question was stupid. "I'm organizing a funeral, dear. Nobody's okay." I spent the night helping to welcome people, serving coffee, listening to stories about my father that all sounded the same. A hard-working man, a man of few words, a man who was always there. And I agreed because it was true. He was always there. I just had never stopped to ask, where else had he been? That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the damp-stained ceiling that had been there since I was 12, I realized I knew almost nothing about my father's inner life. And something inside me I knew I was about to find out. The wake was on Thursday, 2 days after he died. My mother wanted it to be quick. "There's no point in dragging this out," she said. I didn't argue. I never argue. The funeral home was small, one of those with moss-green carpet and floral wallpaper that looked stuck in 1987. The room was more crowded than I expected. My father's work colleagues, guys who played poker with him on Thursdays, neighbors from 2 streets away whom he helped replace roof tiles after a storm. All dressed in black, speaking softly, holding cups of bad coffee. I was standing beside the coffin, fulfilling my role. A handshake. "Thank you for coming. He would have liked to know you came." Empty phrases that we repeat because silence would be worse. My father was there, in the suit he wore to my wedding 5 years ago, before the divorce. He seemed smaller, older, his hands crossed over his chest. Those large hands that fixed 1,000 things in my childhood. I looked at him and tried to feel something other than emptiness. That's when she appeared. A woman I'd never seen before, in her early 40s, short blonde hair, a simple black dress. She entered slowly, looked around, saw the coffin, and stopped. She stood there long enough for 2 people to look at her curiously. Then she walked over to me. Her eyes were red. She'd cried in the car. You could tell. "I'm so sorry for our loss," she said, and she took my hand in both of hers. Our loss. Before I could ask anything, she let go of my hand, looked at the coffin, stood there in silence for 10 seconds, and left. Quickly, as if she had done what she came to do. I looked at my mother across the room, She was staring at the door. The woman had just left, and the expression on her face wasn't one of confusion. It was anger. Look, if you're listening to me now, you know what it's like when a small thing becomes the piece that makes everything fall apart. And what came after that wake changed everything. I wanted to ask you something. Subscribe to the channel, because this story doesn't end here, and you'll want to know what I discovered. And leave a comment telling me, where are you watching from now? Siri. This makes me feel like we're in this together. Okay, let's continue. I waited until the last person left. My mother was in the funeral home kitchen with the organizer, finalizing details for the next day's burial. I approached slowly. Mom, who was that woman? She didn't look at me. She continued shuffling a list of names. Which woman? The blonde, in the black dress. She said, our loss. My mother stopped. She put her pen down on the table. She looked at me with that expression she always had when I asked her something she didn't want to answer. I don't know who you're talking about. Mom. I said I don't know. She left the room. I stood there holding a cup of cold coffee, feeling that strange weight on my chest. The weight of knowing you're being lied to, but not having enough proof to confront it. I went back to the main room. The coffin was already closed. Tomorrow would be the funeral, and after that, theoretically, life would return to normal. But something inside me knew that normal was over. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about that woman. Our loss. Why would she say that? Who was she? I thought about asking my Uncle Gary, my father's brother, but he was the type who wouldn't talk about anything that might cause discomfort. I thought about going through my father's things, but my mother was keeping everything as if it were gold. I thought about letting it go. Maybe she was just a former coworker. Maybe I was reading too much into a poorly worded sentence. But I didn't believe it. And you wouldn't believe it either. Because there are things we feel before we understand. And what I was feeling was that the last 23 years of my life had been built on an edited version of the truth. I just didn't know how much had been cut. The next morning, at the funeral, while the pastor was reading Psalms and my mother was holding my hand too tightly, I saw the woman again. She was far away, behind a tree. She didn't come closer. She just stood there, watching from a distance, until the coffin was lowered. And then she was gone. And I decided I needed to know. After the funeral, there was lunch at my Aunt Linda's house. Sandwiches, salads, chocolate cake that no one touched. People sat in circles, talking about the real estate market, about the heat, about anything but death. I stood near the window, looking out at the backyard where my cousin and I used to play soccer as kids. My Uncle Gary came over. To me, he had the same broad shoulders as my father, the same way of holding a soda cup. Are you holding up? He asked. I said yes. He nodded. Your father was a good man. He had his flaws, but who doesn't? His flaws. The phrase stuck with me. Because until that moment, I had never thought of my father as someone with real flaws. He was absent sometimes, too quiet. But I thought that was just his way. What kind of flaws? I asked. Gary looked at me as if I had asked something inappropriate. It's not the time, kid. I just want to know. He sighed. He looked at the glass. Your father carried things. Things he didn't know how to let go of. But that doesn't change the fact that he loved you. Remember that. He left before I could ask more. And I stood there, with that phrase echoing. Things he didn't know how to let go of. What did it mean? I looked at my mother across the room. She was sitting with her sister, drinking iced tea, laughing at something someone had said. As if nothing had happened. As if the woman from the wake didn't exist. As if I hadn't seen the anger on her face. That night, after everyone had left, I helped wash the dishes. My mother was mechanically putting the leftovers away in the refrigerator. I waited for the right moment. Mom, I need to ask you something. She closed the refrigerator door, turned to me. If it's about that woman, I already told you I don't know who she is. But you looked at her as if you did. She fell silent. The kind of silence that screams, "You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me." She took a deep breath. "Your father wasn't perfect, but he was a good husband, a good father, and that's all you need to know." I left the kitchen. I went to my father's office upstairs, a small room with a wooden desk, a bookcase full of technical books on plumbing, an old armchair where he used to read the newspaper on Sundays. My mother hadn't touched anything yet. Everything was exactly as he left. I opened the desk drawer, pens, paper clips, old receipts, and underneath everything, a photo, small, 3x4, the woman from the wake. She was smiling, and next to her, holding her hand, was my father, and on the back, handwritten, "Forever, Sarah." I held that photo long enough for my vision to blur, not from crying, from pure confusion. My father, the woman, forever. As if those were two words that could coexist with his 28 years of marriage to my mother. I turned the photo over. Again. I looked at her face. Sarah. She was wearing a blue t-shirt, her hair longer than at the funeral, sunglasses pushed high on her head. The photo seemed recent, maybe 3-4 years ago. My father beside her had the expression I only saw when he was truly at peace, when no one was asking anything of him, when he didn't need to be the provider, the fixer, the man who didn't complain. I put the photo in my pocket. I closed the drawer. I left the office quietly. My mother was in the living room watching the news at a low volume. I said good night. She said I could stay a few more days if I wanted. I said I needed to go back to Denver. Work, bills, responsibilities. She nodded. She didn't insist. We never insisted on anything in that family. Everything was layers of polite silence piled up until they formed a wall. I returned to Denver on Saturday. 5 hours of flight with the photo in my jacket pocket. I took it out about 10 times. I looked at the back. Forever, Sarah. Each time I read it, the phrase meant something different. First I thought it was a fling. Then I thought maybe it was more. Then I thought maybe I didn't know what more meant. Because if my father had a whole life hidden, what else didn't I know about him? About myself? About the man I spent 23 years trying to impress with my stability, my boring job, my tiny life that never asked for much? I arrived at my apartment and threw my suitcase on the floor. I sat on the sofa. I looked at the photo again. And for the first time since I received the call from my mother, I felt anger. Not sadness, anger. Because he died without giving me a chance to ask, without giving me a chance to understand. And now I was alone with a photo and a word, and no answer. I could have let it go. I should have. Maybe. But you know how it is. When you realize you've been kept in the dark, you can't stop searching for the light, even knowing that what you'll find might blind you. And that's exactly what happened. On Monday, I called the office and said I was sick. Food poisoning. I'd need a few more days off. My supervisor didn't question it. She'd always been good with boundaries as long as I met my targets. I hung up and opened my laptop. I searched for Sarah, plus Sacramento, plus my father, in increasingly absurd combinations until I realized I didn't even know her last name. So I just searched for Sarah Sacramento. 600,000 results. Useless. I searched Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Nothing that matched the face in the photo. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I called my father's cell phone. I still had the number saved. I knew it must have been turned off, but I called anyway. It went straight to voicemail. His voice. "You've called Robert. Leave a message." I hung up. I called again. I listened again. I hung up. I did this 7 times until I realized I was looking for something in his voice that would tell me he was who I thought he was. But voices don't carry truth. Only tone. Wednesday. I got in the car and drove back to Sacramento. 6 hours on the road. I called my mother on the way, told her I'd forgotten something at their house. She said the door was open. I arrived at night. The house was dark. I went inside. I went straight up to the office. This time, I rummaged through everything. Drawers, folders, boxes under the desk. I found tax returns, car manuals, old Christmas cards, and at the bottom of a folder labeled Insurance, I found an unlabeled envelope. I opened it. Inside, 3 letters, all handwritten, all signed S, all from my father. I read the first one right there, standing in the dimly lit office. The handwriting was delicate, slanted to the right. Robert, I know this is difficult for you, but you promised me you would tell him. He deserves to know. I deserve for him to know. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm just asking you to be honest. Date. 3 years ago. He deserves to know. I read. It again. Him. Me. It had to be me. Who else? I read the second letter. Robert, I can't go on like this. I love you, but loving you is killing me. You have a family. I understand. But I'm also part of your life now, and pretending I'm not is destroying me. Date. 2 years ago. The third letter was short. Robert, I accept. But if he ever finds out on his own, you'll have to live with it. Date. 1.5 years ago. I folded the letters. I put them back in the envelope. I sat in my father's armchair. And finally, I understood. My father had lived 2 lives, and I had been deliberately kept out of one of them. I sat in that armchair until my mother arrived home. I heard her car in the driveway, the front door opening, her footsteps climbing the stairs. She stopped at the office door. She saw me with the envelope in my hand. She didn't say anything. She just crossed her arms and stood there waiting. I stood up. How long have you known? She looked away. Since the beginning. How long is the beginning? 15 years. 15 years. I was 8 when it started. I was in the 3rd grade, learning multiplication tables, playing video games after school, thinking my family was solid. And all the while, my father was building another life on the other side of town. Why didn't you leave? I asked. She gave that bitter laugh that's not funny at all. Where would I go? I was 40 years old, unemployed, no money of my own. Your father paid for everything. And besides, she stopped. Besides what? Besides, I still loved him, even knowing. I still loved that bastard. She sat on the edge of the desk. She looked at the bookshelf. He said he was going to break up with her. Every time I threatened to leave, he said he was going to break up with her. And I believed him. Because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was admitting that I had wasted my whole life on a man who was never completely mine. Her voice broke at the end. She didn't cry. She just broke, like glass cracking from the inside. I didn't know what to say, because part of me was angry with her for staying, and part of me understood, because I did the same thing in my marriage. I accepted crumbs because I was afraid of ending up with nothing. I sat back down in the armchair. She went to the wake. I saw. Why? Why was she going? My mother looked at me. Because she loved him. Maybe even more than I did. Because loving someone in secret, without demands, without bills to pay, without dishes to wash, is easy. I had to love her father on the bad days. She only had Sunday afternoons. I remained silent. Because she was right. And I hated that she was right. Do you think he loved me? I asked. She answered without hesitation. Of course he did. In his own way. In the way he knew how. But your father was good at loving half things. Half the time. Half his heart. I left the house that night. I drove back to Denver without stopping. 6 hours staring at the road, thinking about all the times my father told me he was busy. All the times he left on Sunday mornings saying he was going to help a friend with a leak. All the times he came home late and my mother didn't ask anything. I had grown up believing that silence was peace. But the silence was just fear in disguise. I could have stopped there. I probably should have. I already knew enough to rewrite all my childhood memories. I already knew my father was human, flawed, capable of selfishness. But knowing wasn't enough, because there was a missing piece. I knew my mother. I knew her pain. But I didn't know Sarah. I didn't know the version of my father that existed with her. And some part of me, the part that still wanted to believe he was good, needed to know if, at least with her, he had been whole. So I went looking for her. I spent 3 days searching. I used the name Sarah, the city, the photo. Nothing. Until I remembered the handwriting in the letters. The slanted, delicate writing. And I remembered that in the second letter she mentioned, "You have a family." Not your family. A family. As if she had one too. I went back to Sacramento. I went to the funeral home. I asked for the guest list. The clerk hesitated, but when I said I was the deceased son, she gave in. 7 pages of names. And on page 3, almost at the end, I saw Sarah Brennan. I searched on Facebook. Sarah Brennan, Sacramento. I found her. Profile picture. Her with a dog. Status, in a relationship. Job, teacher at Riverside Elementary. I clicked on photos. I scrolled down the page. I saw my father. In a photo from 2019. She and he in a park. He was wearing a cap. She was holding ice cream. The caption, "Perfect day with my favorite person." 42 likes. And in the comments, several of her friends. "You two are beautiful. When's the wedding? Finally, you found someone who deserves you." They thought he was her boyfriend. And technically, he was. Except, he was also my father. And he was also married. And he was also living such a big lie that it could contain 2 entire families. I sent her a message. Simple. Direct. "Hi, Sarah. I'm Robert's son. I saw you at the wake. Can we talk?" 3 hours later, she replied, "I was waiting for you to get in touch. Can we meet tomorrow?" We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. I arrived early. She arrived on time. We ordered coffee. We sat by the window. She was nervous. She fidgeted with her napkin. She looked at her cup. "I didn't know he had died until I saw the obituary," she began. "We had broken up 6 months ago. He said he needed to fix things with his mother. I agreed. But when I saw that he had died, I needed to go, even knowing I shouldn't." I nodded. "How long were you two together?" She looked at me. 14 years. And something inside me crumbled. 14 years. I was 9 when it started. She met my father before I went to high school, before my first job, before I knew what heartbreak was. She was there, on the other side of his life, while I grew up thinking I knew the man who raised me. "How did you two meet?" I asked. She stirred her coffee. "He fixed the plumbing in my house, a leak under the sink. I had just gotten divorced. I was alone. He was kind, not just professional. Kind. We talked for 2 hours after he finished the job. He called me 3 days later. I wanted to feel anger, but what I felt was exhaustion. Did he tell you he was married?" Right at the beginning. He said it was complicated, that he wasn't happy, but that he couldn't leave. Because of you. He said you needed stability, that leaving would destroy you. I believed him. For years I believed him. She paused, took a deep breath. "Until I realized he was using you as an excuse. Not to stay with your mother, to avoid having to choose. I stayed silent, because she was right. My father didn't stay married for me. He stayed married because it was easier. Because leaving required courage. And my father was good at fixing pipes, not fixing emotional messes." "Did you know my mother knew?" I asked. Sarah nodded. "I found out about 3 years ago. He let it slip during an argument. He said his mother had accepted it, that they had an agreement. I was furious, because if she knew, then what was I? It wasn't a secret. It wasn't an affair. I was just the second option, his escape valve." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She wasn't exactly crying, she was just tired, just like me. I asked him to tell you, she continued, several times. I thought you deserved to know, but he said it would ruin the image you had of him. And in the end, I think he was right. Because now you know. And you can see on your face that something broke. She wasn't wrong. Something had broken. But it wasn't the image of my father. It was the illusion that I had grown up in an honest family. I had grown up in a lie maintained by 3 adults who decided that silence was better than truth. And I, the only one who didn't know, spent 23 years living in an edited version of reality. Did you still love him? I asked. She hesitated before answering. I loved the version of him that existed with me. The version that laughed, that talked about dreams, that didn't carry the burden of being a provider. But I don't know if I truly loved Robert, because I never truly knew Robert. And then I understood. None of us knew, not me, not my mother, not Sarah. We only knew the pieces he chose to show us. I left that cafe not knowing what to do with what I had discovered. Sarah gave me her number. She said that if I wanted to talk again, I could call. I kept the number, but I knew I would never call, because talking to her only reminded me of how much time I had wasted believing in solidity. I drove back to Denver that afternoon. I arrived at my apartment and sat on the living room floor. I just sat, because a chair seemed too formal for the kind of crumbling I was feeling. I thought of my mother, the way she held my hand at the funeral, the way she arranged the platters of food as if they were the only thing she could control. I thought of how she went about knowing for 15 years, waking up every day next to a man who had spent half his life with someone else, and accepting it, because the alternative was to have nothing. I thought of Sarah, the way she kept photos of him on Facebook as if he were entirely hers, the way she waited 14 years for crumbs of attention because he said it was for me, for stability, for family, as if family were a good enough excuse to lie to everyone. And I thought about myself, the son who tried so hard to be like his father, who took a boring job because a job meant stability, who married young because marriage was the next step, who accepted divorce without a fight, because fighting meant admitting that I desperately wanted something. I spent my whole life trying to be the adult version of what I thought my father wanted. And my father was busy living 3 lives at the same time without having the courage to be honest in any of them. The following week, I called my mother. I asked if she wanted to sell the house. She was silent for a while. Then she said, "Yes, I want to." She moved to a small apartment near the center. She sold almost everything. Furniture, photos, my father's tools. She kept only the essentials. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "For the first time in 15 years, I'm living in a house without lies. So yes, I'm okay." I didn't call Sarah back. I didn't block her. I just saved her number as a reminder that love isn't just a feeling. Love is also a choice. And my father chose none of us completely. He chose comfort. He chose not to decide. And in the end, he died without having to face the mess he left behind. But I wasn't going to do the same. Because I learned something at that funeral. I learned that the truth hurts, but lies kill. Slowly. Silently. Until you realize you've spent your whole life being a supporting character in your own story. And I wasn't going to accept that anymore. 6 months after the funeral, I quit my job. Not because I hated it, but because I realized I was there for the wrong reasons. Security, stability. The same words my father used to justify being in prison. I didn't have another job waiting for me. I had no plan. I just knew I needed to stop living on autopilot. My ex-wife texted me when she found out. "Finally, you woke up," she wrote. And she was right. I had spent years asleep on my feet. I started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I was tired of carrying weight that wasn't mine. The therapist asked me a question in the second session that changed everything. "What do you want?" I didn't know how to answer. I sat there, staring at the beige wall of the office, trying to form a sentence. And I realized I had never asked myself that. I always asked, what did my father expect? What did my mother need? What did my ex-wife want? What did my boss demand? But never, what did I want? It took me 3 months to start responding. I want to be honest, even when it hurts. I want to build things that mean something. I want to stop accepting crumbs and calling them a meal. And most importantly, I want to stop being afraid of disappointing people who never asked me to be perfect. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time. Because when you stop living for other people's expectations, you're left alone with your own choices. And choices are scary, because they're yours. Only yours. My mother and I started talking more. Not about my father. About us. About who we were before becoming supporting characters in his life. She told me she always wanted to be a landscape designer, that she loved plants, that she spent the last 20 years tending to the garden because it was the only thing she could create without needing permission. At 62, she enrolled in a technical course. Today she works part-time in a nursery. She earns little, but she smiles more. I haven't forgiven my father. I don't know if I ever will. But I stopped letting his anger take up space in my head. Because anger towards the dead is a strange kind of prison. You get stuck in a conversation that will never end. So I decided to end it alone. I decided that he was who he was, that I am who I am, and that these two things don't need to be stuck together forever. One day, about 8 months after the funeral, I was organizing boxes in my apartment, and I found the photo. The photo of him and Sarah. Forever. I looked at it. To say I felt nothing would be a lie. But what I felt was different. It wasn't anger. It was pity. Pity for a man who had so much and wasted it because he was afraid to choose. I tore up the photo, not out of revenge, but because I didn't need to carry it around anymore. Today, when someone asks me about my father, I tell the truth. Not the pretty. Truth. The real truth. He was a good provider, but he was a divided man. And in the end, being divided isn't being generous. It's just being afraid of losing. Some people get uncomfortable when I talk like this. They think a child has to idolize their father, even after he's dead. But I've learned that blind loyalty isn't love. It's just fear of seeing. I stopped apologizing for knowing, for seeking the truth. Because ignorance didn't protect me. It only kept me small. And I got tired of being small. I got tired of accepting edited versions of love because it was easier than demanding wholeness. I got tired of thinking that stability was worth more than honesty. Today I work as a freelancer. I earn less. I have less security. But I wake up every day knowing that I'm the one choosing. I'm the one building. Not a version that someone expected of me. Just me. I fail. I try. But I'm whole. My mother calls every week. We talk about plants, about bad movies, about how strange, but good, it is not to have to pretend anymore. She told me once, "Your father died a year ago, but I only started breathing after you found out. Because finally someone knew. Finally I wasn't alone in the lie. I understood. A shared secret isn't intimacy. It's just shared loneliness. There are days when I miss him. Not the man he was, but the man I thought he was. The father who fixed things, who showed up, who was quiet, but still there. I miss the illusion, and I think it's okay to miss him. Because illusion is also part of grief. We don't only cry for those who have died. We cry for those we thought were still alive. If you're listening to me now and some part of this story resonated with you, it's because you too have lived an edited version of some truth. Maybe about family, maybe about relationships, maybe about yourself. And I want to tell you something. Discovering the truth will hurt. It will rewrite memories. It will make you question everything. But on the other side of that pain, there is clarity, there is freedom, there is the chance to build a life that is truly yours. That funeral rewrote my past. But it also rewrote my future. Because I stopped living the way my father lived, divided, afraid, choosing comfort over courage. I chose differently. And every day I wake up and choose again. It's not easy, but it's mine. And after spending 23 years living the life someone else expected of me, living my own life feels like a revolution, even if it's small, even if it's silent, even if no one but me knows how hard it was to get here. I know, and that's enough. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. This story was difficult to tell, but it needed to be told. If it resonated with you, leave a like. Not as a number, but as a way of saying, I understood. I felt it too. And subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories here. Stories of people who woke up, who set boundaries, who chose differently. And watch the video on the screen now. Because if this story touched you, the next one will show you what happens when you finally stop accepting crumbs. Click. You won't regret it. See you there.